sometimes you got to burn it down and start over. It was obvious that needed to take place.
Third time's the charm. Jeff Ermann, Maryland, or Inside Maryland. Do we have you, or are you Matt Damon on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, where you're just always next, and then we run out of time?
Well, they were trying to hire me over at Maryland to be the next coach, so I had to calls. I apologize.
Yeah, no, that explains it. That's sometimes the phone does be blowing up. I'm sure your phone is actually blowing up with all kinds of stuff these days.
Yeah. It's been pretty busy.
Yeah, to say the least. So I really do genuinely appreciate your time and appreciate you sticking with us here. For those that somehow don't know, Jeff, of course, is the number one Maryland insider, I think, in the entire region, covering this team, knows more about this team and this athletic department than anyone else. And so, Jeff, I'm going to start with what is a really basic question, but kind of is the premise of everything we're talking about with Kevin Willard. Why did Kevin Willard leave Maryland for Villanova?
Well, I think, it was a bunch of things. I think he underestimated how different it is coaching at a Big Ten school when you have a football program that gets a lot of the money and a lot of the energy and attention. Obviously, he did not get along extremely well with Damon Evans, the AD. He felt like they were pinching pennies on him when, his program was having a decent amount of success, and he felt like needed more resources, especially when it comes to NIL and the transfer portal. And I think he's just like a Big East guy at heart, and he came to realize that culturally it just wasn't the right fit for him, and he got more money. Everybody likes getting more money, and the details of his deal haven't fully come out, but you can safely say he got a significant raise and more money for revenue sharing, which obviously is huge for next year and roster building.
So when he was doing all this negotiating publicly and privately over the last couple of weeks, was there any circumstance where he was actually going to stay?
Only he really knows that. My opinion is no. I think he was going to take the Villanova job no matter what. I think a lot of the things he said were an effort to kind of set the narrative, so to speak, so that when he left, people would say, oh, good for him. He got out of this awful situation, and they didn't have any money, and, they were having to recycle basketballs from gym class, like all this stuff. I think I think he wanted to go no matter what. And, he had some pretty good outs, and then Damon Evans leaving gave him a great out because you can say, I don't even have an athletic director, so who am I going to negotiate with? At the same time you're saying that, you have 4 years left on your deal, so it's not necessarily the way he talked about it, you would have thought that he was a free agent after this year. So, no, I think he really wanted to go to Villanova. That was more of a dream job for a Big East guy who's really friendly with Jay Wright, and everything else was kind of just window dressing.
Jeff Ermann, Maryland insider for 24/7 Sports, of course, the website Inside Maryland. You can read all of his stuff there. So there's, I think, a lot of criticism that he lied in press conferences and interviews, whatever, throughout this process. I also think that there's a lot of criticism of him for telling some uncomfortable truths. Where do you think the criticism is valid on both sides of the, hey, we don't air the dirty laundry, such as Mike Loxley said, versus him lying about certain things or maybe relying on semantics arguments versus being totally transparent and truthful?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pretend that everything he said was a lie or there wasn't some base, there wasn't some truth behind it. Maryland's athletic department, everybody knows it's been kind of a mess for a while now. They were very behind on NIL. They were not as proactive or innovative as a lot of other schools, and I think that's partially why Damon Evans left, because he saw the snowball coming downhill at him around the corner with NIL, with Willard being unhappy, and then with Mike Loxley facing a make-or-break year and not wanting to have that uncomfortable spot after football season if it doesn't go that well. So there were definitely some truths there. Maryland has operated in, for a big, prestigious Big Ten institution, they have operated like a mom-and-pop shop in far too many ways. So like most things, I think the truth was somewhere in the middle.
All right, two more kind of specific questions here, addressing some of the criticisms, and you as a guy who actually has answers to this stuff. I'm hoping to get the truth out in the open here.
Hmm.
There's a criticism that he lied to his players throughout this process, and I have read everything that I can read that you have written and many others, and I don't know that I've actually read that. I've certainly heard fans say that. But I also think that these kids grow up in the NIL era, like they've grown up in this version of college basketball, and I could totally see a situation where he does lie to the kids because, of course, I could. I could also see a situation where he's like, "Hey, look, guys, there's a lot of stuff floating out there. I'm going to deal with it after the season," and they all know what that means. So, what do you know about the conversations and the relationships over the last 2 weeks, especially that he had with his players, and how that affected them during this Sweet 16 run?
Yeah, I mean, I know at the beginning of the NCAA tournament, he told the team, the coaches, players, in no uncertain terms that he would be back next year. So he did tell them that. I think as things passed, it sounds like his words were a little less definitive and starting to parse things a little bit. So I don't know that he said it quite as strongly later on. But toward the beginning of the tournament, he did tell them that he would be back next year. But, in terms of what you said about NIL and this era, it's much different now. 10 years ago, if a coach did that, the players would all hate him and everybody would be disgusted. But now it's so professionalized and these guys move around so much. Everybody's basically on a year-to-year deal that I don't think they're outraged at him. I mean, maybe some are. I can't speak for them, but I can say that there's, both Rodney Rice and Jacoby Gillespie, who both entered the transfer portal today. He wants both of them to join him at Villanova, and I don't think they both will, but there's a very good chance at least one of them will. So obviously, they're not holding against him too strongly. It's just a totally different era right now where, it's not just one big happy family that everybody's expecting to come back next year. Guys are just in and out.
I was joking about that with Robbie Hummel last week because apparently Matt Painter almost left before Robbie's senior year, and he's like, I would love to have that conversation, and I feel like I was calling him, being like, hey man, stay, and now the call would have been, hey man, if you go, can you get me more money there so I don't have to stay here? And that might be what happens with Gillespie or Rice, and we'll see. The last thing in terms of kind of the TikTok, if you will, the specific reporting, Jeff, is Jeff Ermann from Maryland, or Inside Maryland, is with us. There's a lot of fans that have said stuff about this team dinner the night before the Sweet 16. Do you know if he skipped that and what the significance or the context around that is, or where that rumor came from?
Yeah, I saw that one. I think it's true, but then someone came back out and said sometimes he just doesn't go to the dinners the night before the game. I don't really know what the truth is on that one. Nothing would really surprise me, especially when it sounds like he delivered the news to his team that he was leaving via Zoom. So, nothing would be shocking. I think at that point things had gotten well beyond what he expected. He didn't expect that the cat was going to be out of the bag. He, clearly said some things in those press conferences that he wasn't planning to say, that he shouldn't have said, that kind of sped up the progression of, the media attention and everything else. So I think by the end he was just done and trying to get it over with, which makes you wonder how focused he was on that Sweet 16 game, because if they had won that game and then you have 2 more days of this intense speculation, it was going to get very awkward.
For sure, and we'll never know. Florida's a hell of a team. They probably are going to win that game no matter what, but certainly, that's different than giving your team the best chance to win, which, again, we'll never know. Maryland now moves forward without Willard. And they obviously don't have an athletic director either. We know there was tension between Evans and Willard. We know that Turgeon, there was some tension. We know that Gary at times didn't get along with certain ADs. How important is the relationship between the next athletic director and the next head basketball coach on the men's side at the University of Maryland?
I mean, it's really important. Fans don't really think much about these things, but no coach wants to be somewhere where, they don't get along with the AD, or the AD doesn't get along with them, which is another reason why it would have been, absurd, I think, at that point to keep him around, because I don't know how you hire an AD who's going to come in and look at what just happened to the guy who hired Kevin Willard, who he essentially threw under the bus by announcing he was leaving for SMU before anyone had gone public with it. and the things that he said at the press conference about this university and the athletic department underfunding the basketball program and all these things, you're not going to find a top-tier AD who wants to work and supervise a loose cannon. So it is important, but, I don't think that they can be picky about that right now because it's going to take a little bit, most likely, to hire an AD, and you can't wait to hire a basketball coach. You're already a week or so into the portal, and, that's where where most of these rosters are built is in the portal. So you got to get someone in there ASAP to start recruiting, and then I guess you hope that the AD you hire can mesh with the coach.
Where do they look next for the coaching side of this? Who are some of the early candidates that are emerging, and will they take any of the alums, your Steve Blakes, your Grievuses, et cetera, who have put their names out there in the mix? Will they take any of those candidacies seriously?
You never know, but I don't think so with the alums. I've always thought, it's a very romantic idea having the star point guard come back and become the coach, and maybe it could work out, but college coaching is more complicated than ever with the portal and revenue sharing and everything else. And so to just have a guy who's literally never coached in college and might have coached a couple of years as an NBA assistant, to me, is way more risky than any of these other names that might be thrown around. I don't think they're going to get a really big name at this point because, again, it's a lack of stability there. And any big name coach is going to cost a fortune. And if they have security wherever they are, how do you talk someone into leaving a safe situation for somewhere where they don't even know who the AD is and they're hearing all these bad things about the funding and things like that? So, there's a few names floating around. I know that they've interviewed David Cox, the associate head coach from the past couple of years, Tony Skinn, coach over at George Mason, who won the A-10 this year. He was assistant at Maryland under Willard a couple of years ago, really good recruiter, primarily responsible for getting Derek Queen to Maryland. I think out of all the names I've heard, I think he's the best recruiter on the list, and, talent is the name of the game, obviously. Chris Collins from Northwestern is on the list, Buzz Williams from Texas A&M, although I think he's faded. I don't see them making that move. And Luke Murray, UConn assistant, who was, a big piece of that back-to-back title run that they had. And then I think there's a few more names that haven't really popped up yet, but long story short, for those kind of warts that they have right now, I wouldn't expect a big flashy name.
Last question for Jeff Ermann here on the Hoffman Show. This obviously was suboptimal, to say the least. It was messy. This is no way that any basketball program wants to spend March, especially a March where they have their best run in 10 years. But is there a chance that in the long run, Jeff, that this is actually good for the program, that this is a wake-up call in some way, and some of the things that, while he might have been disingenuous in asking for them, some of the things that Willard asks for, the next coach is going to want as well, and that Maryland basketball can actually go up from here based off of whatever happens next? Is there an opportunity here, I guess, is ultimately the question.
Yeah, I really do think, Craig, that there is. Sometimes you got to burn it down and start over. It was obvious that needed to take place. You'll have a new athletic director who should, hopefully be better than the last one. I think fans, there's a lot brighter of a spotlight on the program now. He did bring some issues to light that, needed to come to light, even if it was in an ugly kind of way. So I think this very well could be a start over point for the program, but you got to make sure you're hiring the right people. You don't have an AD in yet, so you got to hope the people who are making the hire, make the right call, because we've seen what can happen when you don't hire the right guy.
Jeff Ermann writing about all of this on 24/7 Sports, Maryland affiliate, Inside Maryland. Jeff, really appreciate your time, your insight, and now back to fielding the calls for you on actually becoming the next head coach.
Thanks, Craig. Appreciate you having me on.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.